Good morning, everybody. My name is John Spinney. I'm with the Agency of Education, and my primary content area is around post-secondary transition planning for kids with disabilities. Today we're going to be talking about Act 77 and some of the changes that are happening with PLPs and proficiency-based graduation as part of the education quality standards. This webinar is actually going to be similar to almost the same. It's the same PowerPoint we did at an earlier webinar when all of this information first came out. So I do not have really any new info at the state level. Now what we have done is issued all of the info and guidance out to schools, and schools are working on this, and in Vermont it's local control. So the biggest message here is for you to be checking in with your special educators and your local teachers back home around what is the status at their school around Act 77. Where are they at in their timeline? So I'm going to give you an overview, and again, as you have questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box, and I'm going to address those at the end of the webinar this time. And if I don't know the answer, we will try to figure out a way to get it. Again, this is not my primary content. Most of my work is around post-secondary transition projects like College Steps, Project Search, the post-secondary consortium. There's lots of opportunities for students who are transitioning to career and employment. And we also host a statewide transition conference and Developmental Disability Services Local Collaboration Conference. That's the work that mostly takes up most of my time. So again, feel free to ask your questions, and we'll address them as we can. And just remember, this is locally controlled. Okay, so Act 77 was passed in state legislation, and so it's really this high-level list of things that schools are being asked to do. Now, just like I was saying with local control, so that you have the high-level stuff, and then schools can do it in any which way they want as long as they're meeting the nature of the legislation. So, for instance, with PLPs, the actual template they use could look very, very different from school to school. We don't have a state-mandated template, so yes, there are mandated things that they need to do, but it's going to look different at every district. And not only that, it's going to look different in how the special educators collaborate with the general ed teachers. So that's why it's hard to give an exact sense here at the state level. So again, I'm going to just keep going through this overview. I'm not going to read through every single slide. I'll just give a quick summary. So Act 77 is the Flexible Pathways Initiative to support creativity with school districts as they develop and adapt their educational experiences to be in line with the 21st century classroom. You know, for instance, things like what do employers need to have in high school graduates in terms of skills. Now, the other thing, the big change that's been happening, and this is probably really nationwide, is now that we have, of course, Google. You can just Google, whatever question you have. There's an incredible amount of information out there. So we can't be trying to ask our students information that they can easily Google. What we're trying to ask students to do now is, okay, how are you collaborating with others? What are your problem-solving skills? What are your critical thinking skills? What are your math skills, science, writing, English? So so schools are still trying to kind of work through that and make this shift to sound. Is everyone muted? Yes. Just that. Okay. So schools are trying to adapt to the way that our world is evolving in terms of our access to technology. So it's a lot different, obviously, than it was even 20 years ago. On June 6, 2013, Governor Shumlin signed the Flexible Pathways Bill. So what that did was it expanded the dual enrollment program, expanded the early college program, increased access to work-based learning, increased virtual blended learning opportunities, increased access to career and technical ed, and implementation of personalized learning plans. So PLPs. Schools will work with every student in grades 7 through 12 in an ongoing PLP planning process that identifies their emerging abilities, aptitude, disposition, includes participation by families and other folks on their team. This is for all kids. Guides decisions around course offerings. This is all documented in the PLP. So next year, so fall of 2015, at your schools, the grade 7 and grade 9, you'll start to see PLPs in place. So schools are in a planning year this year. So there seems to be a sound issue that we might want to address.
You might just want to put the mic.
Okay, so we just adjusted the mic, and hopefully that has addressed the issue. So a little more info on PLPs. So a big part of this is to allow flexibility. So you might have a student that is taking a couple of core courses at their high school, and then in addition to that, they may actually be taking a course at a college. They may also be taking an online course, particularly if it's content that they can't get at their local high school, or they may even have an internship at a local employer. And these are all things that can be built into their personalized learning plan and things that work towards their graduation requirements. So there is a lot of information on the Vermont AOE website, Agency of Education. So feel free to take a look at that. If you pull up the Vermont Agency of Ed website, there's an A to Z list. If you click on P and then type in personalized learning plans, there's actually a lot of info to take a look at. So I'm going to keep going through the Act 77 stuff, and then I'm going to talk about the changes that are coming from the education quality standards, which have a big impact on our students with intensive needs who previously had been on a multi-year plan, and we're going to get to that. So dual enrollment. Vouchers are available for juniors and seniors in a course offered by an accredited post-secondary institution. Students can get both high school and college credit for this. And so now what happens if they're on an IEP? Well, so what happens is the student would need to meet the academic prerequisites. Okay, the Vermont Dual Enrollment Program is for non-remedial courses only. So, but if a student is on an IEP and still meets the academic prerequisites and can meet the level of the non-remedial course, then they can certainly get in to that dual enrollment course. Now, once they're in, if they're taking a course at college, there is no special ed at college. I repeat, there is no special education at college. Okay? So what the student has access to when they are taking a dual enrollment course at a college is they would have access to whatever supports and services the college offers for any of their students. And so every college has an Americans with Disabilities Act liaison or designee who is setting up specific accommodations for students who need it. Sometimes a college might call it their student support office. Every college has a different term for it. There is a flow chart that I created that's also on the AOE website that talks about the flow for an IEP team. What does this look like? So it really starts out with, is the student interested in this? Do they want to do this? Is this a good fit? Are they going to meet the prerequisites? And if all those are yes, then the next step is, okay, well, what do they offer at that student support office? Is our student going to be able to, is that going to be enough support for our student? So the IEP team needs to do a little research first before the student applies. Okay. And then now, by the way, also on the AOE site, there is a list of all of the participating colleges in the dual enrollment program and the corresponding Americans with Disabilities Act designee or the student support office contact person. So that can make the IEP team research a little easier by contacting that person. And it's actually a great transition activity because it lets the students feel what it's like without all that extra support that they're getting at high school. Vermont has a major area of weakness for Vermont statewide is an overuse of paraeducators and actually not fading paraeducators at a timeline that is, and it does vary by school. I'm not trying to come down on any one school, but it's an area, it's a trend that we've seen repeatedly with we have data around this as well. So ideally, of course, we want to have those supports and services be able to fade, and that's part of the transition plan so that the student gets better and better at self-directed activity, advocating for themselves and their disability, and really kind of finding their way on their own. And that's why the dual enrollment program is actually a great transition activity, because it kind of captures all those things. So the early college program has been expanded. Colleges and universities may develop an early admission program that allows high school seniors to take a full year of college level courses while completing their high school degree. Simultaneously serves as a student's senior year and also a full year of college credit. Now there are folks at AOE that are covering this content much more specifically. Again, my content is dedicated to transition planning. So if you have questions specifically about any of these programs, you can contact the Vermont Family Network technical assistance line or the support line, and they can direct you to the right folks as well. And we'll give you that number at the end. Also, work-based learning. So this is something that's been somewhat in place already, and actually, if anyone remembers the School to Work program quite a few years ago that received federal funding, the School to Work program has been rebadged as work-based learning. Okay, and there is a new work-based learning manual that is an update to the School to Work manual. Some schools do not yet have a full-time staff on their budget dedicated to this. Some do. It all varies, just like I kept saying with the local control. There's lots of variance out there at the local level. So, but basically, this is all in line with that flexible pathway where you could have, like I said, a work-based learning internship with a local business, and the student is getting really good hands-on experience, not only in a content area or something that they're interested in, but also those skills you can't get from Google. You know, the problem solving, the critical thinking, you know, making good choices, and you know, you know, how to be a good person. You know, the more we can get students out into these flexible learning environments where it's a safe way for them to experience what life is going to be like after high school, it's win-win for everybody, because it lets the students see what it's going to be like after, and be able to learn and get feedback and evaluation from the teachers and support staff that are involved. Just a little more info on work-based learning. Typically, the work-based learning coordinator for a school may also serve as a career and technical co-op coordinator, but again, that's going to vary by school. Okay, proficiency-based graduation. This is actually part of the education quality standards. So up to this point, we've been talking about Act 77. Now, around the same time that Act 77 came out, the Vermont Education Quality Standards, which is a completely separate, different set of rules, also came out. Okay, now the two are in alignment. The Education Quality Standards is not, disagreeing with anything in Act 77 or anything like that, but it is just another set of rules coming from the state. And for our kids with intensive needs, it has a big impact, and we'll get to that. So proficiency-based graduation, basically we start to get away from what is called Carnegie units, or those credit hours. So that, a student must have 60 credit hours in order to graduate. Okay. Whatever the school is using to determine graduation needs to be based on proficiency. Okay. In order for the student to move on to the next grade level or receive a diploma. So now, as far as proficiency-based graduation and the IEP. So for those of you parents that have a son or daughter with a developmental disability who in Vermont may have been on what we call a multi-year plan. So just as a reminder, in Vermont we have always done one diploma for all kids. Some states do a special education diploma or an IEP diploma. We don't ever want to be like that. So this is something that's very important to us all across the state, and our philosophy, we want one diploma for all kids. And when the education quality standards were getting drafted, and we're taking into the account that using Carnegie units and credits for graduation is going to be going away or slowly fading out because schools are being asked to switch over to using proficiency-based graduation requirements. So where am I going with this? So what I'm saying is that the multi-year plan, which is how we've always made it so that kids can have one diploma, it allows for kids with intensive needs. The multi-year plan allows for a student who, due to the nature of their disability, cannot meet the regular graduation requirement. It allows for an alternative credit accrual. So instead of the Algebra 2 requirement, they might be taking a life skills math that's much more functional and specific to their lives, and still meet that graduation requirement for that credit. So since credits are going to be going away in terms of using them for graduation, we wanted to make sure that, okay, how are we still going to do one diploma for all kids? And what is that going to look like? How are we going to keep our kids protected so that there's no issue with that as they get closer to graduation? And so what we did was I just changed the screen to the education quality standards. I'm going to see if I can make this full screen. I forget how to go full screen. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to just read through this. This is a section around graduation requirements and the education quality standards that there was a work group formed with folks around the state as well as Agency of Education folks. And we were very, it took us 6 months to write this section to make sure kids were protected rather. So A student meets the requirements for graduation when the student demonstrates evidence of proficiency in the curriculum outlined and completion of any other requirements specified on the local board of the school attended by the student. This requirement is effective no later than September 2014 for students entering 7th grade and through their secondary school progression for the anticipated graduation date of June 2020, and then with each subsequent incoming 7th grade class. So what that paragraph is basically saying, yeah, we're fading this in slowly, okay? This current school year's 7th graders will not have a multi-year plan when they get to high school, okay? For students eligible for special education services under IDEA or protected by Section 504, the student shall meet the same graduation requirements as non-disabled peers in an accommodated and or modified manner. These modifications will be documented in each student's personalized learning plans. This is where we're going to start to see the PLP and the IEP aligned, okay? This is where, remember the PLP is articulating the general education guidelines, the graduation requirements. The PLP is going to ultimately replace the multi-year plan. And the special educator is going to be helping with the technical assistance around making sure that those modifications are specifically tailored for that student. So the school may have a proficiency-based requirement, let's say for science, and the special educator will create a modification to that proficiency that the student can meet. And sometimes we call those entry points that would be at a level that the student is able to hit. So that's where we're having the special educator help with the PLP process. Now remember, the PLP process is a general education process. We were very clear with schools that they don't say to the special educator, okay, here's all we want you to write the PLPs for all of your kids on your caseload. Absolutely not. The general ed PLP designee, which each school has, is the one that would be writing those PLPs. And then the special educator would be offering technical assistance around those modifications around the proficiency-based requirements. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading through the EQS here, the graduation requirements. The IEP team is responsible for, or the 504 team is responsible for assuring that information regarding the student's individual skills, aptitudes, and present levels of performance are incorporated into the student's personalized learning plan. This shall ensure that the proficiency levels to meet graduation requirements are linked to local graduation requirements and are individually accommodated and or modified for students with disabilities and written into the PLP. This process shall ensure that any student identified as a student with a disability will receive a regular high school diploma after meeting his or her graduation requirements outlined in their personalized learning plan. The development of an IEP does not supplant a PLP, nor does a PLP replace an IEP. Okay, so that's the information that is going to be ultimately replacing the multi-year plan over time. And again, schools, of course, are still doing multi-year plans right now. It's this year's current 7th grade cohort that as they move through and get into high school, that they're not going to be having a multi-year plan. So schools have time to prepare for this. All right, let's come back to the PowerPoint. And so there is a, on our AOE website, there are supplemental resources around PLP, PBGR, and IEP. If you type in, so PBGR again stands for Proficiency-Based Graduation Requirements. If you go to our AOE website and on that A to Z across the top, you click P and then look for Proficiency-Based Graduation Requirements, click that page. there is a document that talks about, it's basically like it's a frequently asked question document about the relationship between IEPs, PLPs, and proficiency-based graduation. And there also is a frequently asked question sheet around the PBGRs and education quality standards. So that's just an overview. Again, all of these things are happening in a planning way at the local level right now. And like I said, it looks different school to school. So the best thing I can say is to be asking your special educators, the teachers that you work with, who work with your son or daughter, and find out what are they doing? What's the status of their process right now around PLPs and PBGRs? What's the template going to look like? What are their high school PBGRs? Vermont AOE did create sample proficiency-based graduation requirements that schools can adopt if they choose to, but they don't have to. They just have to adopt some sort of proficiency-based graduation requirement. Those proficiency-based requirement samples are up on the AOE website as well, if you want to take a look at those. That occurred all of last summer. That was a facilitated process through the Great Schools Partnership with a national expert on personalization. And we had content experts from around the state as well as at AOE working on those proficiency-based graduation requirements. Just to put a quick couple plugs into, there was one thing I didn't mention yet, so coming back to the dual enrollment program, and now I'm starting to have my transition hat on a little bit with some of the projects I'm involved in. So there is some exciting opportunities around dual enrollment through an organization called College Steps that if your son or daughter who has a disability is able to get into a non-remedial course in the dual enrollment program, there's then an opportunity that the IEP team, this would be an IEP team decision, can look at what transition services that College Steps can offer for kids still in high school. So that would be, so they would take their college course as part of the dual enrollment, and that's general ed funding would pay for that through the dual enrollment voucher. And then as the IEP team, the school can contract with College Steps for transition services and work experiences on the college campus after they take that course. And it becomes a pretty nice transition package. So that's happening, and that's happening at each of the College Steps sites around the state, which is like Southern Vermont College, Johnson State, Linden State, Castleton, and there may be a couple others. You can take a look at the College Steps website, and again, they have a high school transition program. Their primary program is for kids who have graduated high school, and that's a 2-year college access program similar to Think College. And again, that program is called College Steps, the first one I was talking about. I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the other organizations that are out there that are part of our post-secondary education initiative. So I just talked about College Steps. There's also Think College, and that's at UVM. That's a 2-year college experience. And then also in the Burlington area is the Succeed program, which also has a residential housing, which Think College and College Steps do not yet have. All of these programs have very, very good outcomes around preparing kids for employment. Almost all of them result in actually a competitive job by the time they leave the program. So even though they're post-secondary education focused, they're actually, at the end of the day, when you really look at what's going on, it's actually pretty much also vocationally employment focused as well. And that's the way it's been designed. For high school seniors, a really great opportunity right now that's coming up in the fall. And again, it's full for this fall, which is great, but as the years go on, so if you have a student who's going to be a senior next year, then you should listen carefully to what I'm about to say. So Project Search is a workplace immersion program for kids with developmental disabilities. They need to meet the Vermont clinical eligibility for developmental services. And it's a partnership between Voc Rehab, Developmental Services, and Education. And we have 2 sites up and running for this coming fall, one in Chittenden County at the Edge Sports and Fitness. And we have about 10 kids at each of these sites. And the other site is Rutland Regional Medical Center at the hospital. And students cycle through 3 different internships throughout the school year. And they have 3 full-time staff that are attached to the project, including a job developer. And the student leaves that final year of high school with a competitive job. And these are, Project Search is actually raising the bar in terms of complex competitive employment for kids with developmental disabilities. An amazing program. So that's happening. Let's see, what else? There's a program called Global Campuses that would also be have some college opportunities for high school graduates who are looking for some professional development and training. Who am I forgetting? Oh, Mansfield Hall is in Burlington, and that actually also has a residential component. Essentially, it is a residential setting for students who are attending UVM, St. Mike, Champlain, CCV, any of the surrounding colleges. And it's for students, typically high-functioning students on the autism spectrum, specific learning disabilities around print disabilities, any type of disability that impacts executive functioning like ADHD, and students get ongoing support around maintaining their studying and the coursework and the social aspects of being in college. That's called Mansfield Hall. You can take a look at their website. So those are some of the main projects I'm involved in. We've done an overview of Act 77 PLPs and PBGRs. Again, find out from your local folks where they stand. So now I'm going to just take a look and see what we have for questions. So there's a question around, will you make the slides available? Yes, they have the Vermont Family Network has the PowerPoint. Next question, is a multi-year plan only for kids with developmental disabilities? Can a child with mental health concerns also get a multi-year plan? So what the language in EQS originally, so that's, okay, the best way to answer this is historically the answer would be yes, but since multi-year plans are getting faded out, the current EQS, the language that it uses is a student eligible for IDEA or Section 504. So if the student with a mental health concern is eligible for 504, then they would have access to these modified proficiency-based graduation requirements. And historically, with the old rules, if you had a student that the nature of, it doesn't even use the term disability, it uses, I can't remember the exact term. Again, those rules are not current anymore, so I don't believe, we can't be referencing that. But if the student with the mental health concern is eligible for 504, then they should be all set in terms of having those modified, accommodated PBGRs. So this puts more emphasis on a well-developed present levels. Absolutely. Another question, so if my child is in 8th grade now, I don't need to worry about the PLP process, or might need a school implement PLPs earlier and to ask my school. So this coming fall, 7th and 9th graders are going to be starting the PLP process, and then all the cohorts from there forward until all grades now have it. So if your student's in 8th grade now, they will be on a PLP next fall. And there was a question about the program next. It was called College Steps, and they have a website. Next question is, what are the entry points that a team would use to look at proficiencies for youth who need accommodation? So, and this is something that, this is not, again, not my content area, but my understanding, this is something that the special educator would be working with the general ed designee, and they would start with the proficiency-based graduation requirement, and then they would start to break that down into a modified version that the student is able to access. Now, the proficiency-based graduation requirements have already embedded in them a couple different levels, so that's going to help with that process. Take a look at them on our AOE website. And again, that's something that the special educator would be doing with the PLP designee. Every school is going to have PLP designees for the students, and there's going to be many of them. It's going to depend. They often, and again, this is another thing that varies, but some schools have chosen to do this in an advisory model, so that the first chunk of morning time when students first get to high school, they have that advisory period. The teacher runs that advisory is the PLP designee and helps work on the PLPs with those students. So the special educator would be connecting with that person. Again, that model might look different school to school. How can parents advocate for staying in school till 22 if multi-year plan is gone? So we never want to just make a blanket statement around staying in school till 22 that does not promote the right collaboration with schools and what is right for students. It's a very individual decision that is based on that student's interests, needs, and where they're at around meeting the graduation requirements, and reasonable and appropriate access to transition services. So please don't think of an automatic entitlement to 22 for all kids. It just simply doesn't work like that. It's a very individual decision by each IEP team. And for a student with a developmental disability who, let's say, has met their graduation requirements and their proficiencies, but has not yet had reasonable and appropriate access to transition services, then certainly IEP teams can have that student come back and focus on that 100%. And that's happening all the time. Okay? And I don't see that being negatively affected as long as schools are communicating correctly and carrying this out correctly. So I guess in terms of advocating for your son or daughter, the biggest thing to remember, okay, is this statement. Graduation is not just about meeting the graduation requirements, whether they're Carnegie units or proficiencies. Graduation is two-part. It is meeting those graduation requirements and having reasonable and appropriate access to transition services. It's two parts. Okay, for all students on IEPs, that is the big thing to remember. Okay, so, and for some kids, yeah, that might mean continuing through their 22nd birthday. But we simply, when a parent or even a teacher makes a blanket statement that all kids with developmental disabilities are going to continue to 22, it sets up completely the wrong tone that we don't want to have happen. We want these to be individually based decisions in the best interests of our students. We had our keynote speaker at our developmental disabilities conference, this young man with Down syndrome who graduated at 19, is in a competitive job and also in a 2-year college program. And this young man was absolutely amazing. And just a perfect example that students, there doesn't need to be a blanket, till 22. Yes, we do have that available if it's needed for that student, but it's an individual decision. Hopefully my point is coming across. And some schools have PLPs already. Yes, that's a good point. So there was a round of PLP grants that went out a few years ago. So there are some schools that are ahead on this. Okay. I don't have that list off the top of my head. Let's see, last question. Is there a good transition plan? Is a good transition plan the key to students who may need to stay longer. It could be. It could be. Again, what I say to schools when they are trying to determine, should our student continue past their typical graduation with their same age peers? Should they come back for another year or two focused on transition, assuming they're not yet 22? So how do we, what we need to do is actually quantify this statement that I said around reasonable and appropriate access to transition services. It's all about the access. So the only way, there may be other ways, but the main way that I have been working with schools on around quantifying that is to look at what transition services have been offered to that student current year, last year, and the previous few years, and look at those transition services in the IEP, in that transition plan. And that can help the team start to make that decision. Where are we at? Do we need to have the student come back? Has the student received the level of access that we think is the best fit? Or do they need more access? So again, it's a team decision. Okay, so why is it the kids with developmental disabilities with little done on life skills at age 18 or 19 with the little transition planning done in those areas? Okay, let me just try to read this again. Why is it the kids with developmental disabilities graduating with little done on life skills at age 18 or 19 with little transition planning done in those areas? Who helps these students? I'm not really sure what this question is. Who helps these students? So if a student is eligible for developmental services, the intake coordinator from the developmental services agency certainly can be invited to those transition planning meetings. And there's also things like funding priorities that come into play, and what is the student going to be eligible for with developmental services who is our state agency. So essentially, once they graduate, if they are eligible for developmental services, then yes, that agency is working with them at their whatever services they are eligible for. It might be worth having a webinar with Jenny Masterson, who's my counterpart over at Developmental Disability Services, and she's very good. And she can explain this process. My student had only, this is another question or a statement, I suppose. My student had only one transition assessment at age 16. So that's something that, we're starting to get into a whole nother area. That's something to address with your local school. It sounds like the school was not very familiar with transition assessments. Our outcomes are a lot better, and so currently our outcomes are better. And we actually have a state team that is heading to the National Transition Technical Assistance Center. We're going to have all of our data, and we're going to be looking at how we build better capacity as a state. And specifically around transition planning and making sure that special educators are totally up to speed and that families are as well. Another question: I have a few years till my child graduates, but I'm not familiar with the transition plans being mentioned. Will these plans and services be separate from the PLP, or are they part of the academic schedule? Are there sample plans available somewhere to look at? Absolutely. So yes, there's a great deal of information on that. The easiest thing to do is in Vermont, if you Google Vermont Transition Learning Community, it'll give you the website that I manage. It's a resource website that has all sorts of transition-related information and resources. And if you look along the right-hand side, it says popular resources. There are sample transition plans that are embedded in Vermont IEPs. There are sample assessments. There's a whole website dedicated to transition assessment with hundreds of assessments on there. There are sample case studies that our federal technical assistance folks around transition created around a multitude of different students with a huge varying degree of disabilities. So yes, there's lots of resources out there. Google Vermont Transition Learning Community. And if you can't find it, connect with VFN. They will get you hooked up with that. They're very familiar with it. And that looks like it was our last question. So thank you for joining us in today's webinar. This webinar will be archived on Vermont Family Network's website along with many other previously recorded webinars. Be sure to visit VFN's website at www.vermontfamilynetwork.org for a complete list of upcoming webinars, workshops, and support groups. Take care, everybody.